start talking about the movie Imperium, starring Daniel Radcliffe. This one is directed by Daniel Ragusis. Now, this is not the typical kind of movie that we would normally do on this channel, but we actually have a friend of the channel in Jennifer Marshall, who we interviewed some time ago, and she briefly spoke about this movie. I didn't give any spoilers, don't worry. And, you know, so we thought we'd check it out. I will leave the link to Jennifer Marshall's interview in the description here if you want to go and check it out. So we thought we'd have a look at it, and I'll give you my thoughts on Imperium. So basically this is based on, or inspired by, a true story. But I would caution to anyone to watch a film which is inspired, specifically that word, in the fact that I feel that means there is a kind of grain of truth here. There was some event which was somewhat similar to this, but it's obviously been adapted and fictionalized for obviously entertainment purposes. Now, that doesn't mean to say that obviously the story isn't without merit, and obviously there's certain things probably have happened like they did in real life. But let's talk about the movie that we have in front of us rather than the actual events that may have taken place or may not have. So, as I said, Daniel Radcliffe basically plays an FBI agent called Nate Foster, and he is this kind of bookwormish, fairly kind of introverted guy. He kind of looks, I have to say, they kind of make him look a little bit like Harry Potter. I think obviously that's a little wink there. It's quite funny. And basically there is a terrorist threat. Now all this kind of radioactive material has been stolen, and whilst most of the agency is just kind of looking straight at Islam, basically there is one kind of senior agent who thinks maybe it's a domestic terrorist and maybe it's actually these kind of white supremacists. And they're basically, she kind of makes Daniel Radcliffe kind of go undercover to try and sort of integrate with this kind of like this white supremacist group to try and sort of find out what's happening. And basically, there has been some controversy about Daniel Radcliffe's casting, the fact that he's too much of a kind of a nice guy to be cast in this role. I actually think it's quite good casting, because it kind of subverts your expectations. You might expect some kind of like typical kind of you know, gruff skinhead type to kind of take the part, but the fact of the matter is that this film basically shows you that, you know, there are different types of people within all walks of life, including white supremacy. So when Radcliffe's character basically goes into this variety of different groups, he'll meet a variety of characters, some which are very kind of overtly kind of racist, somewhat seem almost he has some kind of kinship with, almost to a certain degree. So this is what it shows you. It shows you this kind of this broad spectrum of these kind of types of characters that exist within kind of you know, radical organisations such as this. And basically, it's not so much as the sort of the skinhead types that are the kind of the main focus here. It's more of your kind of like your fascists, kind of like, and the kind of the more of the upper echelons. So what do I think about this film? I have to say, let's talk about the casting first of all. So Daniel Radcliffe, I actually thought was very good in this. So I thought he was thoroughly engaging in this role, and I actually liked his casting in it. So I will be in the camp where I think it's quite good to kind of subvert your expectations. They do actually have a few lines of dialogue saying that basically he doesn't fit the typical kind of undercover agent kind of mould and things like that, because he is kind of somewhat nebbish and things like that. So I kind of quite liked it, and when we see that kind of transformation into his kind of undercover, and he's got the shaved head and he gets tattoos and all of that kind of stuff, and you do think, man, he kind of, you know, you can kind of see, if you didn't know it was you know, obviously an actor and stuff, you'd probably think, that kind of look, you know, kind of looks the part, so to speak. This says me with a shaved head. Anyway, and so I thought he was pretty good in the role, and I have to say, I liked his performance. I thought he did a powerful performance. I thought the rest of the cast all were very good as well. You've also got Sam Trammell, was it, who played who was in True Blood? I forget the actual character's name. So, and Tony Collette as well, who plays the his kind of like handler, I suppose, his handler. So there's some pretty decent performances here throughout the cast. Do I have any complaints? I do. I have to say the actual story is somewhat workmanlike, if that makes sense. It does seem not a particularly cinematic film, and is kind of adapted fairly in a kind of pedestrian-like manner. So the actual story beats themselves, there is a bit of a bait and switch in it, which I kind of quite liked, but it pretty much kind of just goes to a somewhat predictable kind of story and things like that, and it does seem to be a little bit paint by the numbers. It is still an interesting film, and I do like the kind of look behind the curtain at the sort of ideology and the kind of the exploration of kind of people's mindsets into that, and obviously how it's affecting Daniel Radcliffe's character, who hasn't been in undercover work before, and his character hasn't, and how it's sort of affecting him and things like that. So I thought that side of it was very good. But in regards to the actual story itself, I thought it was not bad, but just kind of like pedestrian. Also, I would say the ending's quite weak. It kind of doesn't really have a particularly satisfying climax, I wouldn't say. It is somewhat anticlimactic, but it's certainly not a bad film. It just seems like it would be like a television movie, basically, but with pretty good acting, basically. So it's fairly small scale. It feels kind of quite local and stuff like that. I actually quite enjoyed it, though. I did think it, mainly because of the performances, and obviously, led by Daniel Radcliffe. Obviously, it's a somewhat touchy subject matter. It's certainly not going to be for anyone. I wouldn't say it's particularly graphic and doesn't really have any sort of scenes of kind of graphic violence and stuff. If you've watched American History X and stuff like that, it's not kind of like that, to be honest with you. It's more about the ideology behind these kind of things, which in itself is very interesting, and it's an interesting kind of look at that kind of world. But overall, I thought this film, despite it being, not particularly spectacular, was very solid. So I will give this movie a 6.5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.